Hello and welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity. If it's the end of the month, we are talking horror. In this case, we are talking about horror in December of 2022. Last month of the year, I actually watched quite a few horror movies this month. But before we get to talking horror, let's talk a little bit about whiskey. So every month when I do this, I like to open up a new bottle of whiskey. First, I took up my glass. I've got this sort of cheap, I don't want to say cheap, a knockoff of a Norland glass. You can kind of see, I don't know how well this shows up on camera. It's a dual-walled glass, so your hand isn't actually touching any of the glass that's touching the whiskey, which is hypothetically gooder. Whiskey I'm opening up this time is going to be our Willet straight rye whiskey. And this is all now made, distilled, bottled, everything there at their distillery down in Bardstown. Right. There actually is a 5-year I've got that I got at a special event a couple of years ago, but I'm not going to open up that one this time. So this is just a 4-year age stated, which honestly is a little young. There's a lot of ryes that are kind of coming into their own now and coming out at 6 years. But I kind of always like this one, so that's what we're opening up. So there we have our Willet straight rye whiskey. Real peppery on the nose. It's a really good rye. So this comes out to 105 proof. Again, this is aged 4 years. Now, for a lot of bourbons, 4 years would be a little bit too young. Ryes have a tendency to mature a little bit faster. I'm not quite sure why. A lot of baking spices, kind of like a molasses, allspice, kind of warm. It actually kind of fits the holidays a little bit, even though we're past the holidays or almost past the holidays. Yeah, just a real nice, warm, yummy, spicy rye. That being said, let's talk about the movies that I watched this month. So the first movie was called Gone in the Dark. This is a movie with Winona Ryder and Dermot Mulroney. This is kind of one of those movies. It was fine. I didn't dislike it. It's about a woman who... let me see here. You see, the problem with some of these horror movies, especially when you watch a lot of them, some of them kind of run right through you. So a girl and her boyfriend go out to this Airbnb, and there's people already there, and then some horror happens. I just didn't... This movie didn't connect me with me that much. I like Winona Ryder, and it's good to see her doing a lot of stuff. The boyfriend was played by John Gallagher Jr., who I've seen in a fair number of things. I think he's pretty good. Dermot Mulroney's pretty good. It's just, I don't know. It's fine. It's pretty straight horror. Didn't really speak to me particularly, but it's fine if you like a uncomfortable couples kind of like thing. Then maybe check it out. Let's see here. The next one was, so this is a little bit of a cheat. I watched Violent Night. I don't know if you consider that a horror movie exactly. I called it good. I think it's sort of Die Hard with Santa Claus. I don't know if that's a spoiler. It doesn't really, because it's kind of in the trailers. It's pretty violent. I enjoyed it. I think David Harbour is pretty good in that role. He's kind of just playing David Harbour, it feels like. It's not too deep, but I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it. Again, not a whole lot to say, but it's Die Hard with Santa. He's Santa and he's killing terrorists. There you go. Another one that I kind of came across, I think this is 2022, and that is Torn Hearts. So it is a young, up-and-coming country duo that is going to meet one of their heroes, played by Katie Seagal, who, she's always great in everything, and it's just good to see her. This was pretty good. It's kind of, is there going to be a double cross? Is there supernatural? Is there not supernatural? And I won't say which it is. but it's a fun movie. It's fairly trying to decide who the villain is, and what's wrong with this person, and maybe they had it come, and maybe they're it's kind of like whether or not these two girls really like each other, or whether or not they're going to double cross each other and all this other stuff. Not amazing, but it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. And again, Katie Seagal is always good, so I kind of enjoy seeing her in pretty much anything. Okay, so the next I watched what I will refer to as the Pooka saga, as it stands so far. So that is Pooka and Pooka Lives. This might be a little bit of a cheat because technically these aren't movies; these are episodes of a television show called Into Dark. But they're an hour and a half long, and they play like movies, so I'm gonna treat them like they're a movie. The first one is a little more cerebral, as cerebral as the name, as a movie called Pooka about a killer children's mascot can be. But I think it does sort of talk about, the unreliable narrator. The main character is this actor who has decided to take on the Pooka persona for a company so they can advertise these toys in this sort of pop-up shop. He then maybe things aren't quite as they seem. It's good. It's fun. Well, the first one's less fun. The second one is very fun. The second one is Pooka Lives. And that one they sort of drop all the pretense of it being kind of a cerebral thriller, and it is just a supernatural slasher, and I think it does very well at that. It's very fun. It's breezy. Pooka is Pooka killing people, and it's got a great theme song. The Pooka theme song is very, very good, and my wife has had it stuck in her head for some time now. Okay, the next one. A bunch of these ones that I've watched this month have just been very, very mediocre, and I didn't have a lot to say about them, unfortunately. So this is the first. Willow Creek. So Willow Creek is Blair Witch Project, except it's Bigfoot. And it's Bobcat Goldthwait, actually, I think, directed or wrote it. Maybe both. Yeah, wrote and directed it. I like Bobcat. I think he's an interesting cat. I almost said he's an interesting cat. He's an interesting guy. This one, to me, it was fine. It feels very much like, Blair Witch Project, but Bigfoot. I don't know. I think that the two leads are fine. It just doesn't really distinguish itself in the found footage genre, particularly for me. I heard some people talking about there's a very long scene in a tent that I heard, some people thought was a really well made scene. I thought it was kind of dull. This movie was fine. If you're really into found footage movies, this is definitely one you have to see, because kind of if you're a found footage completionist, then you're definitely going to want to watch that one. Okay, the next one is one that I was trying to watch as many of the 2022 horror movies that I could. Tomorrow, I think tomorrow you'll probably see my best and worst of 2022 horror. Spoiler alert: this probably will be on there, and that is Firestarter. This movie did not. I don't know why it exists. They didn't have any new ideas for this movie. It doesn't say anything new. It's really, really dull. The movie is the movie feels half asleep the entire time. It's Firestarter. If you've seen Firestarter, you've seen this. There are no new ideas. There's nothing about this that I had a bit of a tough time getting through this one. It's very very yawn-inducing. Yeah, not a lot to say about that one. Bed Rest. So Bed Rest is a movie about a girl who's pregnant, and something happens sort of late in her pregnancy, and she's forced to be on bed rest, as you might guess from the name of the movie. And there's a ghost, and ghost stuff happens. And there's, again, I hate to be kind of negative on this one, because it's not a bad movie. I know the actors aren't bad. It's just kind of, you've seen this before, and it just doesn't do a whole lot. If you like, I think like pregnancy horror is kind of its own little genre now. There's a ton of that stuff out there. This certainly isn't the worst I've seen of that genre. I thought False Positive was much worse than this. If you like pregnancy horror, check this out. If you don't like pregnancy horror, then probably don't check this out. Yeah. Incantation. See, this movie, I have it listed as mediocre, but it's not mediocre. So it's about a girl who's they say breaks a religious taboo, and now her daughter is having all these sort of supernatural symptoms. I'm not a huge fan of like the supernatural horror that much to begin with, so this movie wasn't for me. I think if you like supernatural horror, and it's found footagey, this could be your thing. This is one of those movies where I'm not saying it's not a good movie. This movie just kind of wasn't for me, and so that's always a hard movie for me to kind of review in my head when I say, okay, if you like this kind of movie, this is your movie. But it's not my kind of movie, so I didn't particularly care for it. That being said, you like that found footage, supernatural, that kind of thing, this might be for you. It wasn't for me. Okay, the next one was a really, really good movie. This Resurrection with Rebecca Hall. Rebecca Hall is sort of has her own little niche of film, where she's playing a spouse who's sort of issues with either a current partner or a former partner. This and Night House have some similarities. They're not the same movie by any stretch of the imagination. They're sort of very different in many ways, but there are definitely some similarities with her character in both. It's got Tim Roth playing a very, very sinister cult leader type person. I don't want to talk too much about this movie because I think especially the ending is very visceral, for lack of a better term. I enjoyed it a lot. It's a rough movie. I mean, it is a it's talking about real serious stuff. And I think it has just kind of the right ending. So Resurrection is definitely a recommend for me. I mean, like if you like the Night House, again, this is not the same thing as Night House. I think the similarities between this and Night House really sort of end with Rebecca Hall playing a character that is sort of dealing with a former partner in some way. But they both have a similar sort of indie horror feel that I really liked, and I thought worked very well in both films. I think I like Night House a little bit better, but that's sort of I like Night House a ton, so I like this just slightly less than I like Night House, so that's pretty good. Okay, Monstrous. I'm actually going to talk about Monstrous and Uma. So Monstrous is Christina Ricci lead, and Uma is with Sandra Oh in the lead, and these are both sort of this new genre of horror. By the way, Uma also has Dermot Mulroney, we just saw in the previous movie. Sort of talk about the idea of family trauma and how that maybe that's the real horror kind of a thing. I think they're well-made movies, but I also think that that's kind of been done quite a bit recently. And I think to distinguish yourself in that kind of a film, you have to do a pretty good job on the film, and you really kind of make something really interesting. And I just don't think either Monstrous or Uma quite rose up to that bar. Again, I think they're both well-made movies. I don't dislike them. They're also not movies I'm probably going to go back to anytime in the real near future. And actually, the next movie, The Long Night, which has Scout Taylor Compton and Jeff Fahey, very briefly, they're all sort of tackling this idea of family. What does family mean, and how does it affect you, and this type of thing. Again, all three I sort of rank as sort of solid, like C+, B- kind of movies. You're not gonna regret watching them, but you also probably won't carry that with you. I mean, some of these might, again, if you have family situations that are sort of similar to these, then I think that you may connect with them more than I did. Uma is about having a very abusive mother. Monsters, I'm not going to say what that's about because I think that will kind of spoil a little bit of the movie, but it definitely is about family trauma. And The Long Night is about Scout Taylor Compton's character is trying to find her roots, where she was adopted, and she's kind of trying to find out where she comes from and who she comes from. All just really dealing with that sort of family trauma, basically. And the last new movie I watched, we're going to talk about two other things after this. The last new movies I watched was the Malevolence trilogy. This was sort of a frustrating set of movies to watch because I think just the way the films are made, I get the impression that there is some serious horror love behind these movies. I really think that the person who made these, which I'll have to come up with the name in a second, is somebody who's genuinely really into horror movies. That being said, they just didn't really work for me. The budget on the first movie is very, very low. Stephen Mina is sort of the writer, director, and kind of all-around person behind these movies. The first one's very low budget, and does kind of feel low budget, to be perfectly honest. The second one actually has a fairly higher budget. It had stars Alexandra Daddario, who I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and the third one has Adrienne Barbeau in a relatively small role. And it's just about a killer who has a kid who he's training the kid to be a killer. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but honestly not much of one. And so you get the first one, which is sort of in present day, in this case I think 2004. The second one is a prequel, and the third one is a sequel. I sort of appreciate how he set those out. They were made a fairly long distance apart. I think because the first one was made in 2004 and the last one was made in 2018. So I think there's like a 4-year difference between the first ones and the second one, and like an 8-year difference between the second one and the third one. And I mean, it does stuff. It does some good stuff. I just don't feel like it. Like, especially in the second one. Here's a good sort of example. You're doing a prequel. And so we have some idea what's going to happen because we've seen the first one, and the first one is in quote-unquote present day. So the second one, you sort of expect, okay, what is the twist going to be where it's not actually quite what we thought happened? And it's just exactly what you thought happened. It's like they just filmed the thing they said in the first movie. And I just found that to be very kind of unsatisfying, that there wasn't something that complicated the plot or something. That it just didn't. So that's sort of my December horror watches. I also did rewatch. I don't usually talk about rewatches here. I just talk about my new stuff, but I thought this was kind of interesting. So I did a full rewatch of the Friday the 13th series, which I thought was kind of interesting, going back to those classic horror movies, because my opinion is always changing just a little bit. I think the first one is kind of a little flawed. I think the second one is incredibly underrated. I think the second one's a really, really solid horror movie. 3 is about average, I think, for a Friday the 13th movie. 4, obviously, for a lot of people, and maybe myself included, is the best. It's sort of the quintessential Jason, and Tommy Jarvis is sort of his nemesis, played originally by Corey Feldman. 5 is... I don't like 5 very much. 5 is made by a director who's sort of, I guess, more famous for doing exploitation or perhaps pornography, and you can sort of tell by the way that it was filmed that it kind of looks that way. And I'm not going to go through each one, but the Friday the 13th movies are really interesting, and I every time I revisit them, I kind of come up with a different point of view. I mean, the one that probably that I think is the most interesting from my perspective is Part 6, because Part 6 is sort of, I feel like, a little fan servicey, and I think when I was younger and I first watched it, I loved it, and now rewatching it, it kind of barely feels like a movie. It feels like there's a ton of stuff that just kind of happens. There's a ton of extra kills that were put in there because the movie wasn't long enough. It's fine, but I definitely that's the one that has sort of fallen the most in my estimation. 7 is Jason versus Carrie, and the first Kane Hodder, which Kane Hodder just was kind of born to play that role, and I really like that one a lot. And then 8 is the sort of ultimate dick tease of Friday the 13th movies, where they say it's Jason Takes Manhattan, and Jason is literally in Manhattan for about 15 minutes. And if you take the actual part where he's literally in Manhattan, it is for, I think, maybe 45 seconds, because everything else was filmed on sound stages or in, I'm not sure where else they filmed. It might have been in Vancouver. Really, really bad ending, too. And then you get into the later ones with Jason Goes to Hell, I think is a There's a lot of good stuff there. I think it has some great kills. Just unfortunately, they forgot to put Jason in it, which is a bit of an oversight. And then, 10 and Freddy vs. Jason and the remake kind of just are bad and get worse with each, successive entry. I think the remake is very tough to watch if you like that series, because it just feels like, it feels like a Michael Bay Friday the 13th movie, which it essentially is. And that's the worst thing. That's just the worst thing. So that's my thoughts on the Friday the 13th. The other one, I did a full rewatch of the Hellraiser series too, which that series to me is always a tough rewatch because, unlike Friday the 13th, which Friday the 13th, if you take those movies, and this is why the rankings for Friday the 13th is very difficult for me, because there isn't a ton of deviation from the mean when it comes to the quality of the Friday the 13th movies. Again, I would take out the remake because it's really not a part of the series. And maybe Freddy vs. Jason. So if you just take the 10 actual Friday the 13th movies, the separation from the best and the worst isn't that far. It really isn't. I definitely like some better than others, maybe even a little bit significantly, but they're not massive differences in quality. Whereas the Hellraiser films, those really start to go downhill very, very, very quickly. And even the ones like Part 6, which is a movie that I remember liking when I first watched it, going back rewatching it now, which the subtitle is Hellseeker, it is very dull for a lot of the movie. Very, very dull. Most of the scripts were not written as Hellraiser scripts, which is kind of depressing. Although I think with Hellraiser Judgment, which is the previous entry to the most recent, showed some promise. It's definitely still got a lot of, it's got some work to do, but it at least feels more like a Hellraiser movie. And then I think the new one was quite a bit better and is among the top tier of Hellraiser flicks. So that's my feelings on those two series. That's about all for December. We're also, like I said at the beginning, I'm going to do my favorite horror movies and least favorite horror movies from this year, and you should see that tomorrow or the day after. That being said, on that bombshell, I will end. I want to thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Have a good drink.